Welcome in, everybody. You are listening, as always, to the Authority Podcast here on the B Podcast Network. Thanks for being with us. Looking forward to my conversation today with a returning guest, Dr. Chad Dumas. Chad is a Solution Tree PLC at Work Assessment and Priority Schools Associate and an international consultant, presenter, an award-winning researcher whose primary focus is collaborating to develop capacity for continuous improvement. With a quarter century of successful leadership experience, Chad has led significant improvements for both students and staff. He was previously on the show to discuss his book, Let's Put the C in PLC, and today he's back to discuss his latest, The Teacher Team Leader Handbook, Simple Habits to Transform Collaboration in a PLC at Work. Chad, welcome back.
Oh man, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
Let's start with the elevator pitch for the new book. What is the brief summary of what this book's about and its purpose? What made you write this book as your latest?
Yeah, well, what made me write this book is, I get to work with incredible educators all over the country every day. And teacher team leaders would ask me, what do you do in this situation? What do you do in that situation? And they would raise challenges here and there. And I found myself sharing with them both nonverbal communication skills and specific strategies that the team could use to overcome those obstacles. And they would say, is there a place where I can find this list of these things? And my response was, no, I need to write a book. And they'd say, when can you have that done? So that really was what started this whole thing, is that I was
Mhm.
sharing those tips and tricks. And so this book then launched with identifying the most impactful, simplest ways to transform collaboration, and really starting with the role of the team leader. We know from the work of effective practices in schools that none of us can improve student learning by ourselves. Every single one of us needs each other, right? No matter how much I know or how good I am at it or how much innate talent I might possess, none of us can meet the needs of every kid in our classroom or school. And so if that's like a foundational premise, we know that PLCs have a track record of 60 some years or almost 70 years of working. So we can't do it ourselves. So we need each other. PLCs are the most promising strategy for making that happen. In PLCs, the team is the engine of the process. And we know from the work on teams that the most effective teams have somebody in a designated leadership position. So you follow that train of thought, and we get to, okay, so what does a teacher team leader need to know and be able to do? That's what this book is about. What does a teacher team leader need to know and be able to do to transform collaboration?
Yeah. Now I'm going to go off script and ask you, if the team is the engine, what's the fuel?
What's the fuel? That's a really good question. So I've actually not explored that analogy fully. And the engine for the process, what really
Mhm.
drives the work of improvement, is the team. What would be the fuel? I guess off the top of my head, I would think the fuel is the team addressing the four critical questions. First, what do we want students to know, be able to do? Second, how are we going to know when they know it? Third, what are we going to do when they don't know it? And fourth, what are
Yeah.
we going to do when they do know it? I guess that would, off the top of my head, as you help me explore that analogy a little bit
Uh-huh.
more, that's what I would say.
And we know you're the mechanic, so we got that covered.
There's a lot of us mechanics, right?
How important is it with the PLCs for those who are going to participate to establish the mission of the PLC, why the PLC exists, what it's for, what its purpose is, what it's about, as a starting point for probably gaining interest and participation, right, among those maybe who have, we've talked PLCs on the show here before, and that PLC light, right, or just the different versions of where that term is used, and it's not necessarily a PLC as you would describe it, but to kind of get the participants around the mission. I mean, what's the importance of that?
Oh, I think it's really important. And it's a step that I think a lot of schools and teams have skipped over the years. So schools develop their mission. That's their purpose as a school. And then we assume that teams know what their mission is
Mhm.
within that. And I offer to readers what Ken Williams says is the purpose of a team. And I think it's very succinct, and I think it's really important for a team to be very clear about it. And since I've written the book, I've had lots of conversations with teams and team leaders and principals.
Hmm.
And I'll ask them, what do you think the purpose of a team is? It's interesting that it's all over the map. I don't think we've really been clear about it. Somebody will say, well, it's to implement what the district says is the curriculum guide, or it's to make sure that we're planning our lessons, or it's figuring out who's going to make what copies, or it's figuring out the bus schedule or the field trips and these types of things. And Ken Williams, he says it very succinctly, and I love it. He says, here's what the purpose of a team is. It's a high bar, but here it is. It's to guarantee learning. And then he goes a little further, to guarantee learning of three things: team identified, grade level, essential standards. That's the purpose of the team. It's going to do a lot of other stuff in part of that process. But why we exist, why a collaborative team exists in a PLC is to guarantee learning. And what are they guaranteeing learning? The team is going to decide what they're going to guarantee learning about. And it's got to be grade level or above. We're not going to guarantee learning of stuff below grade levels. You might have to address that in your
Yeah.
quest of grade level. And you're going to guarantee learning of essential outcomes, what the team determines is essential.
Yeah. How does that how does that end up working when you have those conversations? Ken Williams wrote the foreword to the book, and
Did.
one of the things he mentioned is, I think it was you who had shared the 2014 Gates Foundation study
Mm-hmm,
about the,
mm-hmm,
that term PLC being a dreaded word in schools. And in
mm-hmm,
his observation, he thought, you know what, it's even become more so over
mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm,
years. And
mm-hmm,
and I'm sure that relates to a lot of what we referenced earlier about that most PLCs are not really PLCs, I guess.
mm-hmm,
In other
mm-hmm,
words,
mm-hmm.
right? It's if it when it's used in the lowercase professional learning committee and community, and it is just a term that is, more generically meant to indicate, well, teachers are supposed to collaborate and work together, that there might be some not so positive experiences with that as compared to PLCs implemented in an intentional way and according to the PLC at work framework. But how, I really like that definition, and because it just anchors on that student learning goal and
Mm-hmm.
what those critical standards are, what the focus is, and it's hard to argue with, right? And the supposition in there being that this is the way to make that happen. Is that a starting point? Often, I mean, are you typically, when PLCs are formed, are we having to find at least one member of that PLC who is either inexperienced in it or has had negative experience or whatever, and bring them in? Is it kind of a weak link model, right? Where the PLC is only as strong as its least engaged member?
Yeah. So, like, when I'm working with teams,
Mm-hmm.
how much do they buy into this idea of what their purpose is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It depends on the team. And it depends on the length of time, I think. I mean, I'm just kind of like thinking quickly over teams I'm working with. I have seen some pushback,
Yeah.
quite frankly, with folks. If your experience with PLCs has been around doing what somebody else tells you to do, it can, or managerial type stuff, the B's of schools, buildings, buses, and budgets, and that's what you've used it for, it can be a challenging shift to now be thinking about guaranteeing learning. And that's a big word. Like, guarantee is huge.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean the team's going to necessarily meet that, but that's why you exist. That's the purpose of it, right? I
Right.
was actually with the team today that was looking at their mission of the school. And so we looked at some missions of organizations, businesses, and we pulled up the Nike mission. And it was unbelievable, the audacity, I suppose, of the Nike mission statement. Here it is: I just Googled it real quickly. Nike's mission is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And then they go farther. They have a little asterisk around athlete. So if that's not far enough, like to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world, that's a high mission, right?
Mhm.
Then they asterisk athlete and they say, if you have a body, you are an athlete. What? Their mission, that's their purpose, is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. They don't say, oh, but wait a second, hedge this and hedge that. No. And so I think that's the power in Ken's stated purpose of a team is there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's the mission. That's the purpose. Is Nike successful in bringing inspiration and innovation to every body in the world? They're not even talking about in the US. They're talking in the world. That's a high bar. That's their
Right.
purpose. And they're anchored in that. So we think about the purpose of the team. It's a high bar. That's why
Yeah.
you exist as a team. Does that mean you're going to make it happen? Is Nike making it happen? No, but that's their purpose. The team, they may not make it happen. Maybe you could even say probably won't, but that doesn't change the mindset, the focus, the intentionality. The purpose of this team is to guarantee learning,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah. Let's talk about making it happen. So the book is written in two parts. See,
Mhm.
Foundations is part one, Actions, the longer part, is part two.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give us the overview of what the parts cover and why you organize the book this way?
Yeah. So as I was sharing with teacher team leaders for their challenges, moves, techniques, and strategies, these are the actions that the teacher team leader takes. I realized that those actions have to be grounded in authenticity, and I would just say authenticity. And that authenticity has to be rooted in who you are as a person. That if you try to use these moves, techniques, and strategies without examining who you are as a person,
Hmm.
they either won't be as effective or they'll be perceived as manipulative. So that's where part one came in. So part one is who you are. So that's the two parts, who you are and what you do. So part one, who you are. What's your role? What are your responsibilities? I contend there's three responsibilities of a teacher team leader. Boom, boom. That's what they are. Let's be clear about that. I offer assumptions. I think there's 5 assumptions that are helpful as a teacher team leader that if you hold those assumptions, that will help you then in helping your team become more effective. And then I offer 3 mindsets. Mindsets are attitudes leading to action. That also, I think if you hold those mindsets or similar mindsets, those will help you move the team forward. So that's the first part. It's the shorter part, but I think it's probably the more important part is really grounding yourself, who you are as a leader. Then you can take the approaches in part two and leverage those for maximum impact.
So with the roles and responsibilities of the teacher team leader, it's like, what is the role? Who becomes the teacher team leader? I mean, who
Mhm.
actually ends up, I guess, inhabiting that role? And
Mhm.
then what are those responsibilities?
Yeah. So I offer that the role is to ensure the effective functioning of the team.
Hmm.
Like that's it. The role is to ensure the effective functioning of the team. And of course, the purpose of the team is to guarantee learning. So the role of the team leader is to ensure the team is able to do that. So then the 3 responsibilities, of the 3 responsibilities, the first 2 I think are the most important. So they are hierarchical or ordered in rank of importance. So the first one and the
Yeah.
second one are the most important. The third one is the least important, although that's the one everybody talks about.
Mm.
The third one is to do the work. And I contend that is actually the least important of the 3 responsibilities. The first 2 is to make it safe, psychologically safe, and 2 is to build capacity. And those are the most important. And that's what this book is about is psychological safety and building capacity. I don't touch the doing the work. There's lots of other wonderful books on how to do the work. So those are the 3 responsibilities. And what typically happens in most schools is principals ask for someone to serve as a leader of each team, or they go to the teacher and they say, hey, you're well respected by staff, or you're a good teacher. would you do this role? And unfortunately, being a good teacher or being well respected doesn't necessarily mean you have the skills to be a leader of adults.
Right.
It's a different thing to lead adults than students. So
Yeah.
that's why. So that's kind of like the process of how that happens. And pretty much every school I've been in, there's somebody in each teacher team who's either been designated or voluntold or volunteers to kind of be that go-to person, that point person to help lead the team.
The doing the work part, is that the least important because it necessarily has to follow from these other components? Is it because it is less uniquely the responsibility of the leader and it's a shared responsibility among the group? What, like, why do you, how did you determine that priority order?
Yeah, I love that question. The research says.
Okay.
So, a gentleman by the name of Charles Duhigg did a
Hmm.
study with Google in, I think it was 2016. And it
Okay.
was a study with Google, the corporation. And they
Yeah.
wanted to look and see what makes for an effective team. And they studied, I think, 200 different teams at Google. And they, of course, went into this thinking, what are the characteristics of effective teams and what makes them for effective? And, most people think, oh, what makes a team effective is the experience of the people on the team or their credentials or how much they like each other or how good their snacks are when they come into the meetings, right? You can imagine all the different hypotheses. And what they found in this study, by the way, it was codenamed the Aristotle Project. So if your listeners want to Google that, Google the Aristotle Project with Google, and you'll find it. And there's a New York Times article that kind of summarizes it. And what they found is that what makes for effective teams is two things. Well, sorry, one thing, but two elements. Psychological safety. That's the thing that distinguishes effective teams from not effective teams.
Yeah.
And that psychological safety has two things, two parts to it. One is social sensitivity, which is the degree to which members read and respond appropriately to nonverbal cues of each other. That's hard to teach, but that's all the moves and techniques in my book. Those are the nonverbal skills that you watch for and respond to with those moves and techniques to be able to increase social sensitivity. That's number one. The second part of psychological safety is equity of turn taking,
Okay.
which is all the strategies in my book.
Okay.
So there's the first two responsibilities. Responsibility number one is make it safe. That's the social sensitivity and the equity of turn taking. And then building capacity is also around equity of turn taking. It's also around dispersing leadership because so many team leaders put in the position of doing the work for the team.
Hmm.
And that is not helpful for the team. The teacher team leader needs to be thinking about, okay, how are we making this safe? And how are we building a capacity of each other as we then engage in that third responsibility of doing the work?
With respect to those elements and their importance to the PLC, what is the team looking for in their leader? Do they know what they're looking for? Like, particularly in how the leader is able to make the psychological safety happen, to build the capacity. We're talking about peer-to-peer learning, right? What, I guess, the other members of the PLC team, what are they hoping the leader will do? What makes them receptive to participating in that environment that
Mm-hmm.
the leader is working to create?
Yeah. I think most team members who are not the team leader aren't thinking about what the teacher team leader is doing to create that psychologically safe environment and building capacity. In my experience in working with teams, they're so focused on doing the work. Like, we got to do this thing, we got to do that thing, etc. So I think it would be great if they were more in tune with that. And I think that's where the part two of the book comes into play. So what I've done is laid out those moves, techniques, and strategies by those that are really foundational. I call them getting started. And there's like 10 moves, techniques, and strategies to get started. And then there's another 8 or 10 that are focused on building momentum. And then there's another 8 or 10 on overcoming obstacles. And then there's another 8 or 10 on refining your skills as a teacher team leader. And so they grow in complexity. And so I think if teacher team leaders start with those first getting started moves, techniques, and strategies, that's where then the team members come along. And each of those are divided up into things that the team leader does, which are moves and techniques,
Mhm.
and then strategies, things that we all do as part of the team. But thinking about like how do you bring folks along is really by jumping into the work and doing the work. And if you start using the moves and techniques, really are things that people won't even notice you using. Really, they're
Yeah.
nonverbal things, but they'll notice that the team's more effective.
Yeah. Who should be responsible for selecting the team leader?
Yeah, typically it's the building principal. If it's a district-wide something or other, you might have a district director of curriculum or superintendent, depending on the size of the district. But occasionally, like the school's leadership guiding coalition of teacher team leaders might
Hmm.
say, "Hey, let's reach out to this person or that." But most of the time, I see it as the building principal is reaching out to folks, or folks are volunteering. Kind of either way.
Are they often good at that? You reference that certain, surface qualities aren't necessarily indicative of someone who will be effective in the role. Like, are principals typically making good decisions around who those team leaders should be? Are there things that they should be attuned to kind of identify who may be the strongest for the particular needs of the role?
Yeah. So I'm the kind of person who thinks like if you've got the attitude of I want to serve in this role, we can give you the skills to go there, right?
Mhm.
Whether that's as a teacher team leader or as a teacher or as a principal, like in any role, if you've got the assumptions and mindsets in the right place, we can train you in the skills.
Yeah.
And I would offer that those three responsibilities of make it safe, build capacity, and do the work apply to the principal too. The principal's job in leading their school is to make it safe for the teachers. I'm not talking physical space safety, I'm talking emotional and psychological safety. And I'm not talking about nice either, right? Nice is different than safe.
Yeah.
So I would offer that those three responsibilities, while not exclusively the responsibilities of the building leader, are similar. Make it safe, build capacity, do the work.
Excellent. So, kind of, moving into further an understanding of the book and how it's organized and how it's meant to be used. Another piece of Ken Williams' foreword that I thought was interesting is he says the book provides a Swiss
Yeah.
Army knife-like tools for leaders,
Uh-huh.
meaning you don't use them all every time, but you have what's needed for the
Yes.
situation. And of course, that's how the book is organized, but that's also, the book is organized that way because that's what the actions and competencies of a team leader are. Can you maybe just even talk about how that indicates the approach to team leadership within a PLC and understanding the tools in the toolkit and reading situations, using what's strongest are, do you feel like every leader would at some point use every tool? Is some of it determining what works best for that individual?
Yeah. So yeah, and I too love Ken's analogy about the Swiss Army knife because it's very appropriate. So the first part of who you are as a person and really examining the responsibilities, assumptions, and mindsets, it's really a self-assessment, right? And a reflection of who you are as a person. Do you agree with these assumptions? Do you have any yeah buts, right? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, but I really don't agree with this part. And so
Yeah.
really thinking through each of those. Then the second part really is where the Swiss Army knife definitely comes in. I would say that all of them, so the moves and techniques in particular are things because they're nonverbal communication skills, they need practice.
Mhm.
Just like if I were to use a Swiss Army knife, like I remember I had one when I was in high school. I don't think I've had one since then because I didn't know what the tools were. And
Right.
I could open it up and I could say, oh, maybe that's this or that, but did I really know how to use it? So it requires practice. It requires feedback. and refinement over time. And so most of these 40 moves and techniques and strategies, the moves and techniques particularly, require practice. So, as an example, early on, I share the move technique of pausing. And that's not something that people typically do, is pause in conversations, in team meetings. We're so busy and blah, 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 just move, move. And so that requires some practice to pause. And to pause effectively might also involve the techniques of breaking eye contact, a frozen gesture, and breathing. When those things are combined, now you've got a really effective pause. But that doesn't just happen overnight. That requires practice. And I like to practice in low risk situations. So
Right.
when I'm with my family at the dinner table or going for a walk with the family, just or observing on television, these moves and techniques, you'll see them on TV in movies. You'll see actors employing them quite effectively. So yes, they can all be learned. They can all be used. They have to be developed and skillfully employed, just like a Swiss Army knife, in order to really transform collaboration.
I'm wondering what makes the skills and actions of the teacher team leader distinct from leadership capabilities that would be employed in other settings, right? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of overlap, but how do you think about it? The Whatever elements are distinct to that role and why they are the ones to focus on for the teacher team leader within the PLC.
That's really insightful because they're not different. They're the same. And in other words, like anybody can pick this book up and use these move techniques and strategies, use the assumptions and mindsets
Mm.
in their own personal transformation with their spouse, with their children, in community organizations, in their church, as a school leader, as a district leader, as a hospital leader. These are skills that are universal. What I did was take them and apply them specifically to teacher team leaders. And so that's the uniqueness of this book, is I provide in there a description of each move, technique, or strategy, a tool or more, sometimes multiple tools, to help implement it as a teacher team leader, then reflective questions to help with, okay, now that I've tried it out, what might I do to do this better? And then next level tips. Most of them have next level tips. So that's where I've just taken those. Most of the work comes from nonverbal communication science. I just
Hmm.
applied it to the teacher team leader, but it can be taken and applied anywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're important skills. I mean, the example you shared, it's similar to participating in a media training today. And, I think we talked about similar skills of take your time, pause, think before you speak. I think at least that gives you a certain, a little bit of a higher floor. If I had to rate the four, the order of the four outcomes, how people respond the best. I guess maybe people respond well to somebody who answers or speaks quickly and says something smart. And then below that, maybe somebody who thinks and then says something smart. But I would say next, it's like if they think and say something that's not so great, I still like that better than somebody who speaks fast and then I don't like what they're saying. Right? I mean,
Yeah,
at the very
yeah, yeah.
least, but giving yourself that time, like controlling the flow of information, your own, response, it's a powerful tool within a
Mhm.
group, within a team, within just one-on-one relationships to leverage. So something for leaders to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as you were saying that about the speaking quickly or pausing,
Mhm.
so it's just a natural human tendency that when somebody pauses before they speak, people who are listening attribute a higher level of credibility to what they say. And you think about like examples in political discourse, those people who pause before speaking, we just internally we think, oh, what they're going to say is really important. Whether or not it actually is accurate doesn't matter, but we attribute that. And then when you pause after speaking, people remember what you said more just from the pause. And that's just a natural human tendency. So we can, as teacher team leaders, as school leaders, as whatever, if you want to increase, if people blow you off, pause before speaking, get their attention, take a breath. Now they'll attribute more credibility to what you say. Simple as that.
Good, then I must have lots of credibility.
People assume things in their mind about you based on how you do it.
Right.
So let's make sure that they hallucinate what you want them to hallucinate, as opposed to hallucinate whatever they're going to hallucinate. And if I know that they're going to hallucinate credibility by me pausing before speaking, and I want them to perceive me as credible, then let me pause.
Yeah. Yeah. Good techniques. Yeah. I mean, pausing after you speak, also a great technique. Also, when I talk through in the media training space of like, make your point,
Mhm.
maybe reinforce the point, and then stop.
Yep.
Right? Because the longer you continue, you're getting off on tangential topics, like you're obscuring the memory of what was the key thing you're saying. You are giving your listeners the opportunity to remember something totally different, something kind of besides the point, right?
Yep.
And I always say, if you find yourself saying phrases like, oh, by the way, then like you gotten off topic. Easier said than done sometimes in certain settings.
Yes.
So, I'm guilty of it myself, but it's kind of, all right, what was the thing I really wanted to get across
Mhm.
here? And then
Mhm.
end
Mhm.
of story. What are some things that are not part of the role of the teacher team leader?
Not part of the role of the teacher team leader.
Yeah, I mean, they that may be perceived to be, or right, or just that are important for that team leader to know. This is not your
Yeah,
responsibility, right? We talked about what the
exactly.
responsibilities are.
Yeah, like non-examples. Definitely, the teacher team leader, in my estimation, is not a mini administrator. Not your job. Now, there's a little asterisk there. In some districts, especially larger districts that I've worked with, larger districts with larger high schools, sometimes those department heads have an evaluation role. That makes it more tricky. But in general, teacher team leaders are not mini administrators. So their job is not to evaluate their colleagues. Their job is not to be a spy or a snitch for the administrator. Their role is not to have power over their colleagues, it's power with. We are in this together as a team. And my role as a teacher team leader is to facilitate that, to ensure that we are effective in our functioning. So that's what I would say. Teacher team leader is not a mini administrator. They're not a snitch. They're not a spy. They're not a tell people what to do
Yeah,
person.
excellent. So, how about that shift from teacher to teacher team leader? So, I have whatever, however it's coming about. I mean, maybe in particular for that teacher who wasn't angling for the role and got tapped by their principal and is now figuring out, okay, how do I make this transition? Maybe it's even for the teacher who put their hand up and volunteered, but now has to figure out, how do I actually do this? Maybe it's even harder for that person because I volunteered, now I have to back it up. But what does the shift look like? What's important to understand?
The shift from, okay, so I'm a teacher. Now I'm going to be serving as a teacher team leader.
Hmm.
I would say the biggest shift is internally, if you need that shift. Some people
Yeah.
don't. Some people read those assumptions and mindsets and they're like, yeah, okay, that makes a total sense, right? So as an example, the first assumption that I offer is that people do the best that they can. Now, an assumption is something we hold to be true. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a fact.
Yeah.
So if I'm somebody who naturally looks to the best of people and assumes that they're doing the best that they can, that's not going to be a huge shift for me. But if I'm someone who looks at what people do and thinks, why are they doing that? Are they trying to undermine me? Oh, they must be doing this or that. That's a big shift.
Yeah.
So depending on who you are as a person, those assumptions and mindsets are a big shift. The second one is you can only control you. If you're somebody who thinks that you can control other people, that's a big shift. So it kind of depends on the person, but if you're someone who, like, those are a challenge for you, that's a big shift. If you're somebody who reads those assumptions and mindsets, you're like, oh yeah, that just makes a lot of sense. Now I need to work on these skills. Those are the skills to go to and start developing.
I mean, I guess there's an element of your personal psychological safety within it. And you have
Mhm,
to be able to take some chances, step into it, try to make it happen when you're creating the
mhm, mhm,
environment for those around you. If people are going to be effective as members of the community, they have to be willing to put some ideas out there, take some risks, and feel like those assumptions are happening in both directions, right? Certainly around the desire to do their best, to get stuff done, to, just the assumption of good faith, right?
mhm, mhm,
That's and of positive intent
mhm,
as
mhm.
well, right? The
Yep,
reason
yep.
why this person is the team leader, and particularly if this person kind of volunteered to be the team leader, is because they really believe in that mission
Mhm,
of guaranteeing learning. They
mhm,
believe in the importance of this community as a way to do that.
mhm.
And they think they can bring something to the table in facilitating that.
Yep.
Within the PLC, the individuals, when they're putting forth an idea or an effort, we assume the positive intent or, and clear motives around why they're doing it, what their participation
Mhm,
looks like, what their non participation looks like maybe in some instances, right? That it's
mhm,
based
mhm,
around trying to do what they can to be a positive contributor. I'm sure it takes some work to get there, but when there's all these different dynamics, and again, a leadership, I believe, is the most effective when it is a series of behaviors and actions and rather than titles, right? When
mhm,
it's a
mhm,
verb, not a noun. But
mhm.
that also means that it requires everybody to come along to that in
Yep,
their
yep.
in their own pace and understand that there's not necessarily a requirement
Mhm.
to be willing to to respect the role of that leader as much as it
Yeah,
is seeing the value in what they're doing and the value in what you're doing as a collaborative.
yeah. That was actually something that I had to struggle with myself because I firmly believe that, like you just said, leadership is a verb, not a title. I've also seen it said like leadership is a function, not a role. I just my mind is going blank.
Yeah,
One way or the
right.
other, leadership is a function, not a role. And as I was doing the research for this book, that's where I found that actually there is research that says that yes, while we want to build the capacity of everybody to serve in leadership roles, the more nuanced the work, the more there is a need for leaders, somebody in a designated leadership position. And so that's where I came down with okay, so yes, everybody can be a leader. And if you've got a team of 5 people and there is no designated leader, it's not going to, it may not hurt the team. It could, but it may not if we're all thinking about these skills and leveraging these who we are and what we do type things. So yeah, absolutely. The idea. So what that to kind of bring it to a head would be that okay. So if you're in a team that doesn't have a designated leader, that's great.
Mhm.
Pick up this book and learn some skills so that you all can get better at these skills together. Or if you're on a team with a leader who doesn't have the skills, I wouldn't buy the book and give it to them. Like say, hey, you need to read this. Although you could, maybe depending on your dynamics of the team, but you could pick it up and you could learn how to leverage and influence others on your team, including those who are in those leadership positions.
So you write about a number of the challenges the teams face.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if there are any that stand out as the hardest to overcome and
Mm.
or the most preventative of the team's ability to achieve its goal of,
Yeah.
that piece of guaranteeing student learning, like which if maybe they're all equally challenging, but maybe not. But if there are any that really stand out as like if this is present and if this challenge is unresolved, it makes it nearly impossible to achieve the goals.
Yeah. Yeah. The last chapter is all challenges, real world challenges. And then I pull together all the contents from the rest of the book to address each of those challenges. And they're challenges like the team is too big or the team is too small, right? 2 people or 12 people. We've got people who don't follow the norms. We've got people who don't do what they're supposed to do in between meetings. I don't remember what. I think there's half or 7 or 10 different challenges.
Hmm.
My response to the question that you ask, Ross, of which one is the most challenging, I would say is whichever one the team is facing. Because if I'm on a team that is, not facing a certain challenge, well, it's not an issue. So yeah, it kind of depends on the team. I don't know if I could say which one is more fundamental than the others, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And ultimately, every dynamic is different. Everybody has different things that they are trying to work through and overcome and identify, be effective. Chad, I guess we'll close with this. How might a PLC determine the difference between when it's time for some further capacity building and when it's time for a full reset?
So like a team is having challenges, and when do we keep moving forward, doing the best we can? And at one point, do we say, "Hey, we got to bring an administrator in"?
Yeah, let's start over. Let's strip this thing down to the foundations, figure out what we're doing, period, right? Because I'm sure there's many teams who it's like, all right, we're functioning well in some ways, but we're not as effective as we want to be, and we need to,
Mm.
invest in just kind of getting better at some of those areas. But there's probably also occasions where it's either nothing is working or you don't know if anything's working at the very least, right? And yeah, it may be time to put up a hand and say, all right, let's figure this out.
Yeah, yeah. And there are times like that, right? Because the teacher team leader isn't a mini administrator.
Yeah.
So they don't have the power over their colleagues to be able to tell them, do this, do that. So my mind goes to Rick DeFore, and I remember at one of the institutes that I went to many years ago, when one of the sessions, an administrator asked, "How do you know when a team is being productive?" And he said, what's the root of the word productive? And the root word is product. We know that a team is productive through the products. So that's the number 3 responsibility, right? Is doing the work. And so if the work of the team is not getting the work done, then that's when there needs to be some kind of a reset of some sort. Now, how do you get the work done? You make sure it's psychologically safe and you're building capacity for doing the work. But ultimately, the work does have to get done. We do have to guarantee learning for students. And that
Yeah.
requires us using the 4 critical questions to make that happen.
Excellent. Well, Chad, it's been great having you back on the show. Listeners, we are going to put the link below to where you can find the book, Teacher Team Leader Handbook, wherever you get your books. But we'll put the link below where you can find it on Solution Tree. We'll also put the link to Chad's previous conversation here on episode 132. Let's put the C in PLC. Chad, anything else you'd like listeners to check out on your website or elsewhere?
Well, I would love it if they checked out. I've started doing it's inspired by the book, but well, it is directly related, but it's not focused on teacher team leaders. But I've started creating 60-second simple habits tips. So these are just what they sound like, no more than 60 seconds. simple habits that will help to transform yourself, relationships, and collaboration. Whether you're a teacher or a parent or a student or a sibling or an employee of wherever, I would
Mhm.
love if folks check those out. They're on YouTube, and I started in July and releasing two a week, and found that was well, I could do that. Other people weren't interested in two a week. Like that's a lot. So I backed it off to just once a week. So every week, once a week, a new episode drops, and they are again 60-second simple habits tips.
Excellent. Well, we will put those links below to where you can find the book, where you can find our last episode, the simple habits tips, and a few additional resources to help listeners. You can also connect with Chad on social media. So we'll put all those links below, make it really easy for you. If you have not already, listeners, please do subscribe to The Authority to get more conversations coming your way every week. We'll have a lot of good topics covered here, a lot more coming up. So subscribe, give us those ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify. They really do help new listeners find the show. And Chad, thanks again for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.